Hello, beautiful friends. It's so nice to see your beautiful face again. I'm so glad you came back to hang out with me. I sound so lonely right now, but I hope this video finds you really well and that you're just having a wonderful week. If you are new here and you've never seen this face before, then hi, my name's Liz. And if you are interested in things like true crime and unresolved mysteries, then you should probably just hit the subscribe button just there, and we can be like the bestest of friends of all time if you feel like that is something you want in your life. But just so you know, we're best friends now. Joining us today, as usual, of course, is the beautiful Lily girl, here to give us just top-notch emotional support and to just give a generous sprinkling of video and audio disturbances. Editing this, let's switch to Lily Cam. Is everything okay? Are you having a good day, Lily girl? You having a good day? Yeah? So for today's case, we're talking about the Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre. This is a case that took place in 1990, just over 31 years ago, and it's still unsolved. As some of my American friends watching right now will probably know, this was a very brutal mass shooting where 5 people were murdered, the youngest of which was just 2 years old, and 2 people were critically injured. This case took place in the city of Las Cruces, New Mexico, the state's second largest city after its capital, Albuquerque. Today, Las Cruces has a population of around 100,000, but back in 1990, its population was only about 57,000, and it was considered a very safe city. The previous year, in 1989, there had only been 2 homicides, like for the whole year. So we're talking super quiet, super secure, just full of residents that had no idea that their city's homicide rate was going to exponentially explode in just one day. The Las Cruces Bowl itself, where the shooting took place, was a family-owned and operated business that had been running for about 6 years. And in that time, it had become just a bustling little staple of entertainment in the area. The bowling alley featured 32 lanes and attracted just your usual groups wanting just a casual game or two, as well as both child and adult leagues that practiced and held competitions there. There was also a restaurant and a bar and a daycare centre there, so it was really quite a large establishment. That morning, 34-year-old Stephanie Senac was rostered to open the bowling alley for what was most likely going to be a very busy Saturday. And Stephanie was the daughter of Ronald Senac, the owner of the Las Cruces Bowl. With Stephanie that morning was her daughter, Melissa Repass, who was 12 years old, and Melissa's friend, Amy Hauser, who was 13. And Melissa and Amy were going to be running the daycare that day. Amy was also the daughter of Stephanie's boyfriend, Lee Hauser. So just to run over it quickly again, because we've got a lot of connections happening. Stephanie was the daughter of Ronald Senac, the owner of Las Cruces Bowl. Stephanie's daughter was Melissa Repass. Melissa's best friend was Amy Hauser. Amy's dad was Lee Hauser, who was dating Stephanie. So it was a very close-knit team that was working at the bowling alley. In the kitchen that morning, prepping for the busy day ahead, was 33-year-old Ida Holguin. And Ida was the mother of 4 young children and had worked at the bowling alley pretty much since it opened 6 years ago. Ida had actually switched her shift that day with a co-worker so that she could make a bingo game that night. So it's 8 a.m. We have Ida in the kitchen preparing food, and Stephanie, Melissa, and Amy are in the office with Stephanie, counting receipts from the busy night before and preparing to open the bowling alley for the day. Around this time, Stephanie's brother Steve Senac drops by the bowling alley, and as another child of Ronald Senac, the owner, Steve works at the bowling alley, but he's not rostered to work that morning. He's instead on his way to class. He's just picking up his backpack that he left there the night before. When Steve gets to the front door of the bowling alley, he realizes that they are unlocked, even though they're supposed to remain locked until the alley opens at 9 a.m. And I've heard 2 different versions of this. I'm not sure which one is accurate though, which seriously irks me because It seems like such a little detail, but it makes a big difference later on. So the first version is that this was very unusual because, like I said, the doors were meant to remain locked until the bowling alley opened at 9 a.m. And the other version is that Steve was completely unsurprised because his sister, Stephanie, had a habit of forgetting to lock the doors behind her when she opened in the mornings. Anyway, just as he's walking through the doors, Steve sees two men, and these men are walking from behind the back of the building to the side of the building. They're both Hispanic, and Steve notices that there's quite a big age difference between them. As Steve is watching, the older of the two men hands what looks like to be a largish case to the younger man, who then makes direct eye contact with Steve. Steve thinks their behavior is a little bit odd, but he's in a rush to get to class. He doesn't pay it much mind. He instead goes inside to get his backpack and goes to the office to tell off Stephanie for leaving the doors unlocked. Stephanie shrugs him off. She is preoccupied getting everything ready to open up the business in just over half an hour. There's a youth league coming in at 10 a.m., so she is under the pump trying to get everything ready. Basically, ain't nobody got time for your nagging, Steve, okay? So Steve leaves, and for whatever reason, he doesn't lock the doors. I don't know if he was just in a rush or if he was trying to prove a point to Stephanie maybe, or maybe you needed a key to lock the front doors and he just didn't have it on him. But for whatever reason, the doors remain unlocked. At about 8:15, Melissa and Amy ask Stephanie for change to go and get snacks from the vending machines, which, you guessed it, are by the front doors. But once they get there, Melissa and Amy are interrupted by two men who have entered the building that they don't recognize. Melissa and Amy think maybe these guys have gotten the opening hours confused, so they go to tell them that they don't open for another 45 minutes, and then they see that they have guns. From here, things move really quickly. One of the gunmen rounds up Melissa and Amy and takes them to the office, and the other one makes a beeline for the kitchen to grab Ida. Ida thinks he's there to clean until she sees the gun in his hand. He orders her into the office and tells her to join Melissa, Amy, and Stephanie, who are all lying face down on the ground in a corner of the office under the guard of the other gunman. The four of them are told that as long as they do everything they're told and that the men get what they came for, they'll be let go. So when Stephanie, as the only one with access to the safe, is told to open it, that's exactly what she does. The two men take handfuls of cash amounting to somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 and place it into the briefcase that they have with them. But this is a little bit odd because $4,000 to $5,000 is only a fraction of what's inside the safe. They leave the rest of the cash in the safe and instead move on to ransacking the cabinets in the office, rifling through piles of paperwork, pulling out files and the like, and just leaving them everywhere, making this huge mess, almost as if they're searching for something. And the cash in the safe is just an afterthought. And just as it seems that the gunmen have given up their search, apparently unable to find whatever it was they were looking for, 26-year-old Steve Tehran shows up. Steve Tehran was the alley mechanic, but he had recently given in his 2 weeks' notice. In fact, this was supposed to be his third last day working at the bowling alley. He had just graduated from university with a degree in criminal justice, and he had dreams of becoming a police officer in the near future. And with Steve that morning were his two daughters, 6-year-old Paula Holguin and 2-year-old Valerie Tehran. Steve's wife, Audrey, was in class at the local university that morning, so that left Steve in charge of looking after the girls. But when he wasn't able to find a babysitter, his plan instead was to put Paula and Valerie in the daycare that day while he worked. When Steve and the girls arrived at the alley and found no one in the lobby or the kitchen, they of course wondered where everyone was and went to the office, where they stumbled upon the very dangerous situation unfolding inside. Steve, Paula, and Valerie were forced to join Stephanie, Ida, Melissa, and Amy on the ground, and it was very shortly after this that the gunshots started. A total of 25 shots were fired, and all 7 of the victims, including 6-year-old Paula and 2-year-old Valerie, were shot multiple times in the head at point-blank range. execution style, while they had been kneeling. Believing all of their victims were dead, the two gunmen gathered up some of the papers that they had been throwing everywhere onto the desk in the office and set them alight, creating a fire that they probably hoped would destroy any evidence of them being there. And then they fled the scene. But unbeknownst to the two gunmen, their victims weren't all dead. And at 8:33 a.m., Melissa Repass, 12-year-old Melissa Repass, who had been shot 5 times in the head and hands, used the office phone to call 911. I'm going to play parts of that 911 call for you now, but please be warned that this phone call might be very distressing for some of you. And if you think that might be you, then I strongly suggest skipping forward to this time here. For the rest of you, while you're listening to this, just remember that this is a 12-year-old girl that has been shot 5 times, who has witnessed the mass shooting of 6 others, including her mother and her best friend, and who has no idea if the men responsible are still in the building.
Emergency.
Please help me.
Oh, well, slow down.
We were all shot and hold up.
Okay. Where are you at?
1201 East Amador, Las Cruces Bowl.
Las Cruces Bowl?
Yes.
Okay, and there were shots fired?
Yes.
Oh.
All of us were hurt.
Huh?
All of us were hurt. I think I'm the only one conscious.
All of you were hurt? Okay, we'll get an ambulance rolling.
Please.
Okay, what's your name?
Melissa Repass. Please hurry.
Okay, Melissa, we've got them dispatched. Did you see who did it?
No, sir. They told us all to get down. They shot me 5 times.
How many people are hurt?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7 people are hurt?
Yes, I think.
Okay, Melissa.
It hurts.
It hurts? Okay. Melissa, I've got an ambulance and I've got the police officers en route. They'll be with you just shortly.
Okay.
Okay? You didn't see what any of the men
They
were
just
wearing?
took all of our money.
You didn't see what any kind of the men were wearing or anything?
No.
Nothing, huh? They just walked in?
Uh-huh.
Do you know if they were black men, white
With
men?
one black man, they're both black.
2 black men?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please hurry.
Okay. It's okay, Melissa.
There's a fire, too.
There's a fire?
Right on the desk. They're going to burn us up.
Are the men still there?
I don't know. Please
Can you
help.
smell smoke, Melissa?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Can I get the fire
Fire
extinguisher?
department 2.
Can I go get
Stand
the...
by utility 1.
Oh, ow.
Okay, Melissa, we've got them coming, hon. We've got them coming. Is somebody there?
Probably my mommy.
Okay, Melissa. There's a police officer there now, okay?
There is?
Yes, there is. He's going to try and find you.
We're in the office. Oh, God. It's going to burn us right now.
Okay. Can you see flames?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's burning us.
Okay.
Oh, I got bullets in my feet.
Okay.
Got bullets in my head.
The bullets in your head, too?
I can't.
Every time I listen to that phone call, I'm so taken aback by Melissa's bravery. She's 12 years old. She's been shot 5 times, and she freaking asks the operator if she can grab the fire extinguisher to put the fire out. Like, I'm pretty sure she has more bravery in her pinky finger than I have in my entire being. And she'd only been taught in school literally just a couple of weeks before this how to even call 911 in the first place. Just incredible. The entire phone call lasted 4 minutes and first responders were on the scene before it ended. So a really quick response time. And when they got there, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. One of the detectives said that she thought it was a drill, like a mock-up scene. It wasn't until she saw 6-year-old Paula Holguin's body that she realized it wasn't a drill at all, that it was in fact very real. The survivors of the shooting were, of course, Melissa Repass, who made the 911 call and with her bravery saved the lives of her mother, Stephanie Senac, and the alley cook, Ida Holguin, and they were all immediately rushed to hospital for treatment for their wounds. 2-year-old Valerie Tehran was also rushed to hospital, but she was sadly announced dead on arrival. And dead on the scene was Steve Tehran, his daughter Paula Holguin, and 13-year-old Amy Hauser. Now, as you can imagine, the crime scene was just severely compromised. I mean, the first responders' priorities weren't going to be to maintain and protect the scene, right? No, they wanted to get the survivors out and put the fire out ASAP. So you had the police on scene, you had the paramedics rushing around trying to get the survivors out and rushing them to hospital. You had the fire department rushing in to put out the fire. It was hectic. It was chaos. And it spelled disaster for the crime scene, which now not only had damage from the fire, but also had fire retardant sprayed everywhere, as well as cross-contamination from all of these first responders coming in and out. But there was nothing that could be done. It was completely unavoidable. Now, after the shooting, police worked very quickly trying to catch these gunmen. The Las Cruces Police Department, pretty much every police officer was put on the case, and they were working round the clock. Like, days off were pretty much a forgotten concept. They were so determined to catch these gunmen. Within an hour of the shooting, 10 roadblocks had been set up around Las Cruces, and police were very carefully screening anyone leaving the city. And this was really important because Las Cruces is only 50 miles north of the US-Mexican border, so literally less than an hour's drive away. Police obviously spoke with Steve Senac and got a description of the men he saw outside the bowling alley that morning. So when they encounter 4 Hispanic men carrying thousands of dollars in cash attempting to cross the border, they're really pleased. They think they've probably caught their suspects. So they call Steve down to the border to see if he recognizes any of the men, but he doesn't. Steve can't identify any of the men in the car, so with literally nothing to hold them on, police have to let them through. A lot of people seem to see this as like a missed opportunity, like the men were in the car and they were let go on a fluke, but nothing ever came of it. And Steve was so certain of the description that he gave of the 2 men that he saw. So personally, I feel like if they were in that car, he definitely would have identified them. There was also a massive manhunt going on within Las Cruces as well, with 6 aircraft and helicopters flying around trying to find any hint of where these perpetrators might have fled to, as well as a ground search involving not just the Las Cruces police, but also the state police, Border Patrol, the DEA, the list goes on. But the hunt was eventually called off, having turned up absolutely nothing. Back at the crime scene, the only evidence that investigators had managed to turn up were a few fingerprints, but there was of course no way for them to determine if these fingerprints were from the gunman or from literally any of the hundreds of people that visited the bowling alley day in and day out. And it was 1990, so DNA was still very new, so they weren't thinking about taking swabs for DNA samples or anything like that. Police spoke with 2 witnesses from businesses across the street from the bowling alley, and one of the witnesses said that they had heard the gunshots. The other said that they had seen 2 men fleeing the scene around the time that Melissa Repass was calling 911, and this witness's description of the 2 men that they saw matched Steve Senac's description of the men he had seen. The only sort of hiccup, if you will, was that Melissa had said in the 911 call that the 2 men were black, but I think police put this down to the men having darker skin and Melissa being in such an incredibly high stress situation, whereas Steve and this other witness had seen the men outside in broad daylight. And Melissa later would, after she'd had a chance to process everything, agree and say that the 2 gunmen had been Hispanic. And so 5 days into the investigation, composite sketches and descriptions were released of the 2 men to the public. Both of them were Hispanic with darker complexions, and one of them was between 25 to 30 years of age, around 5'10" and 170 pounds, and spoke with little to no accent. The other was around 45 to 50 years old, around 5'6" and 130 pounds, with black hair combed back, and this man spoke with a relatively thick accent in comparison to his partner. Also, Crime Stoppers put up a $12,000 reward for anyone coming forward with information leading to an arrest, and local businesses around the bowling alley pitched in as well and upped the reward to $20,000. So pretty much immediately, police were just flooded with tips, as in they were getting upwards of 50 calls an hour. They had to open up 2 extra phone lines just to deal with all of the traffic. But unfortunately, nothing really came of any of these calls, and police were left with 0 leads. Frustrated at making no real progress in their investigation despite their best efforts, a week after the shooting, police went to interview Stephanie, Melissa, and Ida, who were all still in hospital recovering from their injuries. And Ida had been shot 3 times, and her injuries were so critical that she had to spend 6 months in hospital, relearning how to do everything, including walking and eating. But she was able to speak with police, and she was able to give them some very groundbreaking information. Firstly, her description pretty much perfectly matched Steve and the other witnesses' description of the 2 men, and she agreed that the men in the composite sketches were the 2 gunmen. But Ida said that she had seen these men before, that in the weeks leading up to the shooting, she had seen them at the bowling alley multiple times, and they had stood out to her because they weren't bowling, they weren't enjoying a meal at the restaurant or enjoying a drink at the bar or anything like that. On the occasions she had seen the men, they had just been sitting there looking around the bowling alley, and now after everything, Ida believed that they had been observing the alley's going ins and outs, observing the layout, the staff schedule, casing the joint. Ida told the police that she didn't think this was a simple robbery at all, especially with these guys staking out the place, combined with them not really being interested in the money in the safe and ransacking the office. So everything Ida had to say opened up a lot more theories for the Las Cruces police to explore. They started wondering if it was a simple robbery, because it was starting to feel a lot more complicated than that. Could it have even been an inside job? Something that definitely drew a lot of scrutiny from both the police and the general public was the behaviour of the owner of the bowling alley, Ronald Senac, who was, of course, both Stephanie and Steve Senac's father. Ronald, who we're going to call Ron from this point on, is definitely an interesting guy, and people in Las Cruces already had a lot to say about him before the shootings, like that he was involved in shady business dealings and potentially drug dealing, and the cartels that were allegedly very active in this area of New Mexico. Ron, who actually lived at the bowling alley at the time of the shootings, happened to be away that weekend because he was on a golf trip in Arizona, but he rushed home as soon as he heard the news, and he says he was at the Las Cruces police station every day the week after the shooting, keeping up with the investigation and offering help wherever he could. But the Las Cruces Police Department says this positively was not the case, that he didn't come into the station even once, and that they always had to be the ones to reach out to him. And then, in a move that didn't really gain him any fans, 6 days after the shootings, while his daughter Stephanie and his granddaughter Melissa were still in hospital recovering from their injuries, Ron reopened the bowling alley. I mean, 6 days is quite a short time when 4 people died there, right? I mean, obviously he had gotten the okay from the police. The bowling alley wasn't an active crime scene any longer, but apparently it was still just in utter chaos the day before it was reopened. Ron justified this quick reopening to the press by saying life was for living. So I don't know, maybe as part of his coping with the tragedy, he just needed to get the show back on the road, or maybe financially he needed the alley open ASAP. I mean, he was living in the alley, not in some 5-story mansion, but it's still a bit odd. Ron wasn't the only member of the Senac family that drew interest from authorities, because as well as Stephanie and Steve, one of Ron's other children, RJ Senac, worked at the bowling alley, and not long after the shootings, police started getting tips from the public about RJ's involvement in drugs. RJ worked in the bowling alley as a bartender, and he had a little bit of a problem with cocaine, but the rumors were that he was actually conducting making drug deals out of the alley itself. So police started wondering if maybe this is why the money in the safe seemed like an afterthought to the gunmen, that they were actually searching for drugs. Towards the end of March, the reward money was now at $30,000, and Unsolved Mysteries turned up to do a segment on the shootings. The segment aired in April and just prompted a whole new wave of calls coming in from the public from pretty much all over the nation. But again, none of these calls resulted in any solid leads for police to follow. So after several months with police no closer to finding the two gunmen, the case officially went cold. Now, 11 months after the shooting, on the 4th of January 1991, the Las Cruces Bowl was sold at auction, but not by Ron, because the alley had actually been foreclosed on because Ron was bankrupt. He had a lot of debt, plus multiple unpaid mortgages related to the business. And when I say a lot of debt, we're talking $2 million worth of debt. By today's standards, that's over $4 million of debt. So we're talking like a literal shit ton of debt. So of course, people started whispering that maybe this debt had had something to do with the massacre. I mean, it's not that big of a leap of the imagination, right? Maybe it wasn't a coincidence that Ron's daughter and granddaughter were victims in the shooting. Maybe the shooting had been a very strong message sent by someone who had a direct interest in Ron's debt. In fact, these rumors were running so rampant that Jessica House's mother, Gloria Woods, turned up to the auction carrying a sign that said non-payment may have cost 4 lives. But Ron strongly denied that his debt had anything to do with these shootings, that these rumors had all been made up by the press. He also said in an interview that he was tired of being labeled the suspect, but no one had been labeled a suspect at this point. In fact, to this day, there have been 0 official suspects in this case. So his statements just really confused people and brought him under more scrutiny from the police and the public. The pattern of a lead popping up, police pursuing it, and then discovering it was just a dead end would continue for years. The case was covered by America's Most Wanted in 1995 for the 5-year anniversary, but it had much the same effect as the Unsolved Mysteries segment did. A large amount of tips coming in from the public, of which exactly 0 panned out or advanced the investigation in any way. In 1997, R.J. Senac sadly passed away from a drug overdose, and it was around this time that a woman named Irma Tiarina came forward to police saying that at the time of the shooting, the two gunmen had been staying with her, and that during the manhunt, they had been hiding out at Irma's house, and they had been listening to the planes and helicopters flying overhead, and she had heard one of them turn to the other and say, "We're right under their nose, and they have no idea." But the Las Cruces police were a little bit skeptical of Irma's story. Firstly, she was a bit of a colourful character with a known history of drug abuse, and then secondly, it had been 7 years. They wanted to know why it had taken her so long to come forward. So they asked her to take a polygraph test, which she actually passed. But like 2 minutes after the test, she recanted her entire statement, saying she had made the story up for clout or for money, for drugs. I think she was probably referring to the reward money that was still available. This meant that the polygraph test that, again, she had actually passed was completely useless. I mean, I know polygraph tests are unreliable, and feel 100% free to correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like it's mostly people falsely failing the test rather than falsely passing it. So it does add a bit of an interesting twist, although unfortunately we'll never know if Irma was telling the truth because she also sadly passed away from a drug overdose in 2001. In 1999, the massacre tragically claimed its 5th life. Stephanie Senac had suffered severe brain damage from her injuries that she never really recovered from, as well as extreme post-traumatic stress. Her friends and family said that she had never really been the same in the years following the shooting, and 9 years after the massacre, Stephanie passed away from complications from her injuries. This cold case has been reopened and has been back under active investigation since 2015, according to the Las Cruces police, but no arrests have been made in the 31 years following the massacre. The bowling alley itself has gone under multiple different names and owners over the years, but it went out of business in July 2018 and has sat empty and dormant ever since. Last year in February, to mark the 30-year anniversary of the massacre, the reward money was bumped back up to $30,000. And it was around this time that a news anchor named Stephanie Vale said that she received a phone call from a woman who gave her the name of a man that she swore was the younger of the two gunmen. The woman said that the man's family knew what he had done and that they had helped him keep it quiet all of these years and helped him keep a low profile, and that the man had committed suicide in 1997. It's unclear whether anything came of this phone call because the police have not put out any announcements since the tip came in. Police have also never announced if the fingerprints they found were ever identified or if they had any connection to the shooting. And that brings us to where this case stands as of today. So let's get into final thoughts because there is still a lot of theories and speculations to get through. So there is a lot to unpack here. I'm sorry if this episode of Final Thoughts gets a little bit all over the place and a bit messy, but I have a lot of thoughts just running rampant around my head regarding this case. So I'll try to be as organized and tangent-free as possible, but no promises. Before we explore the theories about why the shooting took place, I think it's important to touch back on some of the details about how they took place, because some of it adds up and then some of it just adds more confusion. Firstly, the timing of the shootings. We're talking about 30 minutes before the alley opens for a busy Saturday. It seems like an odd decision, a little bit risky. I mean, I know there was more money in the safe than your usual weekday because they had been busy the night before, but how did the gunman know that the business hadn't made a night deposit the night before after they closed? And why didn't they take all of the money in the safe? Like I said, it seriously bothers me that we don't know if Stephanie regularly left the doors unlocked by accident behind her when she opened in the mornings, or if this was a super unusual occurrence. Because if she did regularly leave them unlocked behind her in the mornings, and like Ida said, the gunman had been staking the place before the shooting, they would have only had to watch her open for a few mornings to realize that this was the case and planned around her leaving the doors unlocked. Or there could have been someone on the inside that tipped them off that Stephanie left them unlocked quite often. But on the other hand, if it was super out of the ordinary and Stephanie did usually remember to lock the doors, why was it this morning that they were left unlocked? It seems too coincidental. If it was an inside job, did someone potentially leave the doors unlocked for the gunman? The gunman quite clearly had a general idea of the layout of the building and where the staff would be that morning, with one of them grabbing Melissa and Amy and taking them to the office where Stephanie was, and the other splitting off and grabbing Ida from the kitchen. This, of course, suggests that they had been staking the place and that the timing was entirely deliberate, that whatever the gunman had planned, they had it planned for that specific time, and they knew generally where everyone would be. You might remember me saying at the beginning of the video that the gunman told Stephanie, Ida, Melissa, and Amy when they were face down on the ground in the office that as long as they complied with their demands, they would be let go. But the gunmen weren't wearing masks or gloves, which strongly suggests that they didn't care if their victims saw their faces or if they left fingerprints. So were they lying? Did they plan on killing everyone all along? Or did they maybe panic at some point? On the True Crime Garage podcast episodes on this case, they bring up the idea that maybe the gunman had been watching the building that morning and that when they saw Stephanie's brother, Steve Senac, enter the building, they thought he was the alley mechanic, Steve Tehran, assuming they had a general idea of who was going to be there that morning. So when they saw Steve Senac leave the building, they thought the coast was clear, that the mechanic had left and that there was only going to be the women to deal with. So when the actual mechanic turned up, Steve Tehran, with his daughters Paula and Valerie, the gunmen panicked at the sheer number of witnesses they were going to be leaving behind, and that it was at this point that they decided to kill everyone. But when you look at the shooting itself, I don't think there's any denying that this was a truly brutal attack. And a large part of that is the children involved. I mean, it obviously would have been horrific enough with the adults and the teenage girls involved, but Paula and Valerie, they were just babies, right? And apparently the gunman didn't bat an eye. Just to hammer home to you the brutality these men showed their victims, Paula had bruises on her face, including a black eye, as though this 6-year-old girl had been punched in the face by a full-grown man. And 2-year-old Valerie was shot in the forehead, meaning the gunman had to have been looking into her face when he shot her. This to me doesn't feel like panic or a robbery gone wrong, nor does the execution style of the killings. I think the gunmen always planned on killing whoever they encountered in the alley that morning. That's why they didn't bother with masks. And they didn't bother with gloves because the fire was always planned as well. So I think when you look at this robbery homicide, a lot of the details point to it not just being a straightforward robbery. I mean, they brutally shot 7 people. They didn't take all of the money from the safe, and they ransacked the office looking for something other than money. So what was the motive? I don't know about you guys, but when I was researching this case, the armchair detective in me was completely 100% convinced it had something to do with Ron Senac. I wanted to figure out a way to go back in time and tap the Las Cruces police on the shoulder and be like, hey guys, it was Ron. Like, I don't know. Have you looked into Ron? Because I think it might have been Ron. Guys, it was Ron. Arrest him. Because so many details in this case kind of point a finger directly at him, right? Like his dodgy business practices, his debt, his behavior after the shootings, the fact that he was away on a golfing trip that weekend. And if you're convinced it was Ron, you'll love this. I haven't even mentioned yet that the Las Cruces Bowl isn't the only bowling alley that Ron Senac owned that there was a fatal shooting at. In March 1991, there was an aggravated robbery at Ideal Lanes in Rio Rancho, which is just 3 hours north of Las Cruces, New Mexico. And during the robbery, the 55-year-old custodian, James Chapman, was fatally shot in the head. And Ron had owned Ideal Lanes before it went bankrupt in 1985. So now we've got this huge coincidence where Ron has owned 2 bowling alleys where people were fatally shot during robberies. And unless I'm missing something, I'm pretty sure bowling alleys aren't exactly highly targeted businesses for robberies either. But after looking into the murder of James Chapman at Ideal Lanes, the Las Cruces police announced that there was no connection between the 2 crimes. And they've also said that over the years, they have put literally thousands and thousands of hours of manpower into putting Ron Senac under a microscope, trying to find any shred of evidence that Ron was directly involved or he had some kind of prior knowledge of the shootings, or if it was a revenge hit against him. They also looked into whether RJ, Ron's son, had owed drug money to someone, and that as a way to send a message or as means of a punishment, this person had targeted the bowling alley. To be honest, it almost sounds like the police got tunnel vision trying to pin something on these 2. But despite Ron and RJ just being pretty damn questionable in general, and police pursuing these theories until they were blue in the face, they never found any evidence to back up any of them. So I definitely think if Ron or RJ had been involved in any way in the shootings, or if it had been a revenge hit against either of them for just allegedly being pretty dodgy people, they would have found evidence to prove it by now. The same goes with the inside job theory that a current or former employee was somehow involved. Everyone that had any kind of regular interaction with the bowling alley had their lives gone through with a fine-tooth comb. So I feel like there definitely would have been something found by now to prove that it was an inside job. Personally, I most lean towards the theory that the crime was motivated by the rumors that were going around Las Cruces that there were drugs at the alley. I feel like the gunman or whoever commissioned the gunman had heard the rumors that RJ was dealing drugs out of the alley, and their intention was to locate and steal these drugs. The rumors don't even have to be true for this theory to make sense. I mean, the gunman turned that office upside down and didn't seem to find what they were looking for. So maybe the rumors were just rumors and there were no drugs. Could I say rumors any more times? The combination of the drug rumors and the execution style of the killings also hints at cartel involvement, and cartel involvement is something I could lean towards as well. I think it takes a certain type of human being to be able to shoot children in the head. And it's probably the same type of human being that gets involved in cartels. I know it's probably been a really long video and you're probably running out of drinks and snacks and panicking, but before we finish up, there are just a couple of cases that we need to take a quick look at that happened around the time of the shootings. On Sunday, the 14th of January, 1990, so just a month before the bowling alley massacre, there was another robbery homicide that took place at a service station, literally just a 5-minute drive from the bowling alley. This crime has also remained unsolved for the last 31 years, and it has some serious similarities to the bowling alley massacre. 33-year-old Salvador Lozano was found laying face down in the manager's office of the service station by 2 customers at 10 a.m. and he had died of a gunshot wound to the head. Salvador had been rostered to open the service station at 8 a.m, so it's very possible that just like the bowling alley, this robbery homicide took place before the service station had opened. $5,000 had been stolen during the robbery, and police believed that there was more than one person involved, but this is where the similarities ended. Salvador's hands were tied behind his back and no fire had been lit on the scene. So taking this into account, plus probably more evidence that they didn't release to the public, the Las Cruces police announced that there was no connection between these 2 cases. But there is another case that has been unsolved for 30 years that, again, has some serious parallels to the bowling alley massacre. This case is quite high profile, and I'm of course referring to the yogurt shop murders that took place in Austin, Texas on Friday the 6th of December 1991, so less than 2 years after the Las Cruces bowling alley massacre. If you are familiar with the yogurt shop murders, you will have probably most likely while watching this video been able to pick up on some of the correlations between the 2 cases. But if you are unfamiliar with the yogurt shop murders, then I'll give you a quick run through of the case, focusing on how these 2 cases are in some ways eerily similar. But just a heads up, this quick run through isn't going to do the yogurt shop murders case justice because it's such a massive case with so much information, so I highly recommend looking it up. But basically, on the 6th of December 1991 at a shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt, 4 teenage girls were brutally murdered shortly after the shop had closed for the evening. 17-year-olds Jennifer Harbison and Eliza Thomas had been working at the yogurt shop, and Jennifer's sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and her friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, had been hanging out at the shop waiting for when Jennifer and Eliza closed at 10 p.m. so they could get a lift home. Shortly before midnight, a patrolling police officer noticed that the shop was on fire and raised the alarm. When the fire was put out, they found the nude bodies of all 4 girls just outside the office area. All of them had been shot in the head, execution style. At least 2 of them had been raped, and they were bound with items of their own clothing. The crime scene here, much like the bowling alley, was just very compromised, and for the same reason. There was damage from the fire. There was potentially evidence washed away during the firefighting efforts, plus potential cross-contamination from all of the first responders that had been on the scene. There was only roughly $540 that was found to be missing from the shop. And just like the bowling alley, people have speculated that money wasn't the end goal here and that instead this crime was sexually motivated. So if we compare the Las Cruces Bowling Alley Massacre to the yogurt shop murders, yes, in some cases they are very similar. We've got two robbery homicides that took place at businesses outside of business hours. We've got victims that were shot in the head, execution style. We've got fires lit at the scenes. The crimes also happened within 2 years of each other and have remained unsolved for 30 plus years, despite police receiving plenty of tips from the public. A lot of people have pointed out all these similarities and swear there must be a connection between the two crimes. But in my honest opinion, when you put them side by side, there's a lot more dissimilarities than there are similarities. The dissimilarities I could shrug off include that accelerants were used in the yogurt shop fire, but if it was the same men, maybe they learned from the fire at the bowling alley, which didn't cause nearly as much damage, so they chose to use accelerants in the yogurt shop. Also, the girls being bound at the yogurt shop, whereas no one was bound at the bowling alley. But again, the men could have just changed up their game since the bowling alley. And also, Salvador Lozano's hands were bound at the service station, so if that crime was committed by the same men, then it could be the missing link that ties the yogurt shop murders and the bowling alley massacre together. But the motivations behind the bowling alley massacre and the yogurt shop murders do feel just completely different to me. I agree with the speculations that the yogurt shop murders were sexually motivated. Yet out of the 4 women at the bowling alley, I mean, if you could call 12-year-old Melissa Repass and 13-year-old Amy Hauser women, none of them were sexually assaulted. Also, the event of the yogurt shop murders seemed to have spanned over 1 or 2 hours, where the event of the bowling alley massacre took a grand total of between 17 and 29 minutes. Also, Austin is a 9-hour drive from Las Cruces. I mean, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility, but I don't know. I'd love to hear what you guys think. If you feel like there is definitely a connection between these two crimes, I'd love to hear your reasons why in the comments down below. Because that brings us to the end of today's case, guys. It's been so lovely hanging out with you. I hope you enjoyed the video. Lily, would you like to come say bye? You want to say bye to your friends? Oh, you're going around that side today. You want to say bye? They're over there. They're just there. Thank you again so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate it so much. You wouldn't even believe. I hope you have just the most magical week of all time, and I will see you right back here next time. Bye.